Hi, I'm Chris Sarandon, and welcome to Cooking by Heart.
I couldn't believe the tastes and the flavors.
Lydia Bastianich. Where we revisit the vivid memories of the food we grew up with and the people and the stories attached to that time in our lives.
I was the one sort of like mommy dearest.
I'm pleased to announce that today my guest is Emmy-winning, Golden Globe-nominated actor, director, producer, and best-selling author, Melissa Gilbert. After beginning her career at the age of 2, she achieved iconic status by the age of 19 after a 10-year run on the classic television series Little House on the Prairie. In addition, Melissa has starred in over 50 television movies and feature films, including The Diary of Anne Frank, Splendor in the Grass, and The Miracle Worker, which her company, Half Pint Productions, produced and which also won an Emmy Award. Melissa also has extensive stage credits, having starred in productions of The Glass Menagerie, Bus Stop, and the musical version of Little House on the Prairie as Ma, as well as plays off-Broadway at the Cherry Lane Theater and the Irish Repertory Theater, among many other stage credits. As an author, she's penned 4 best-selling books, including Prairie Tale, a memoir, a New York Times bestseller, and a children's book, Daisy and Josephine. Melissa served as president of the Screen Actors Guild for 2 terms, has served on the executive council of the AFL-CIO, and received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. She and her partner, Nicole Haas, recently launched a lifestyle line called Modern Prairie, which is centered around modern mature women and their needs. I'm very, very happy to welcome Melissa Gilbert to Cooking by Heart. Good morning, Melissa.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Boy, hearing all that just makes me very tired.
Yes, I know the feeling. Well, you know, when we reach this point in our lives, and we've been doing it as long as we have, and you've been doing it since you were, 2 years old?
2 years old, yes, and I'll be 60 next year, so it's been a long time.
Wow, 58 years in the business.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just trying to think. I don't want to say how long I've been in the business. I'm just going to get on to our subject, which is cooking by heart. And one of the first questions I always ask is provenance. That is where we're from, because it has so much to do with the food in our lives. So you were born and raised where?
I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. I'm a true Los Angelino.
What part of Los Angeles did you first live in when you were brought up?
I basically grew up in the San Fernando Valley. Mm-hmm. So I grew up in Studio City and then Encino.
Tell me about your parents.
My father was actually very famous at the time, stand-up comedian, musician, dancer, singer, actor. He started out as an acrobat in the circus when he was a kid. So I come from multiple generations of carnies.
Was his family in show business as well?
Yes, his father was an Irish vaudevillian, and his mother was a French trapeze artist, flyer. And so he got a little bit of both of them. My dad's name was Paul Gilbert, and he actually has a star on the Walk of Fame too.
So I had no idea.
Yeah. So the synergy for me when they bestowed that upon me to see my dad's not far down the road was kind of an amazing experience.
I would think.
My mom was an actor in the 50s. She did a couple Roger Corman movies. My mother's father was a very famous comedy writer. His name was Harry Crane. He created The Honeymooners. He wrote all the Dean Martin roasts. He wrote jokes for John F. Kennedy. An extraordinary human. So I grew up, in a world of lots of travel, almost instantly. My dad was on the road when I was born. So
really?
Being born and raised in Los Angeles, yes, my tastes and the foods and the things around me were influenced by LA, but they were even more influenced by all the places I got to go as a child.
Let's get into that then. What are your first memories of your family and food? Was it sitting around a table?
I have vague memories of sitting around a table. I know we did. I mean, as a child, older child, I clearly remember family dinners.
Right.
One of the things I remember about being little was my mother's side of the family is Jewish. Mm-hmm. So I remember a snack that we used to get, which was matzah with schmaltz and salt.
Yeah.
Schmaltz rendered in onions and salt.
Yes. For those of us listening, my listeners and watchers schmaltz is essentially chicken fat, yes?
Yeah, it's chicken fat with rendered with onion, so it has a very oniony, kind of warm, sweet,
caramelized kind of taste. Yeah.
Exactly, and then with salt on top, and that was sort of the treat when we came home from school, or when we were particularly hungry, but we couldn't eat anything really heavy.
Mm-hmm.
I remember matzo with schmaltz. I remember my mother cooking matzo ball soup, and then she did try to be sort of somewhat continental in things. So sometimes there would be like Chateaubriand, or we ate sushi very early too. So
that's amazing.
There was a lot of stuff. But yeah, it was really kind of interesting growing up with all the different foods that were around us.
I talk to a lot of people who have sushi as a discovery kind of later in their sort of teen years or early 20s. But to experience it that early, also, I think the West Coast and Los Angeles was kind of a hotbed of the introduction of the whole Japanese cuisine sort of movement in this country as well.
I remember very clearly at 9 years old, there was a sushi restaurant opened near our house in Encino. It was a restaurant attached to a motel, actually, on Ventura Boulevard. And we went at least once or twice a week, starting almost the moment they opened their doors.
Wow. This was like early 70s then, sort of early mid-70s? 73. Wow. So then your mom primarily did most of the cooking?
She did in the very beginning, but we also at the most expansive my family was, there were 5 children at one point. There were 3 of us and 2 stepkids. At that time we had nannies, and the nannies did a lot of cooking. So we had a nanny who was French, so we ate a lot of French food. And then we had a nanny who was Swedish, so we ate some Swedish food. And then we had a nanny who was Jamaican, so she cooked for us from that repertoire. So we really had lots of things coming our way as kids growing up.
So early in your life, you were exposed to Japanese food, French food, Swedish food, Jamaican food. This is extraordinary.
Yeah, it was, our palates were pretty well developed as kids. Although for me, the things that I loved most, I loved sushi, obviously, and still do. But as a kid, the things that I loved most ended up being the most traditional sort of American dishes, the things that we didn't really get at home, but you could get at IHOP, like meatloaf, mashed potatoes and green beans, or fried chicken, and just like the really simple things were the things that I had the most fun eating, because those were special times. It was sort of backwards in our life. The fancy fun stuff was at home, and the meat and potatoes were out. Yes,
exactly. I love it. A wonderful kind of reversal. So then you had, at various times as you're growing up, then a sibling, right?
I have 2. I have a brother and a sister. They're younger. I'm the oldest.
Right. And then siblings as well.
Yeah, a stepbrother and a stepsister.
What was it like around the dinner table?
Noisy. Very noisy.
I would think.
Yeah, because there were also, my grandfather would come, or my grandmother would come, or we always had friends over. So it was never just the 5 kids and 2 parents. It was usually 10 people. And there was a lot of talking and passing and carrying on, and games and things that went on. But it was a really big sort of great family feeling. Mm-hmm. A lot of talking over each other. My brother and I throwing rolls at each other across the table.
Yes, of course.
When I was about, I want to say 11 or 12, I started taking an interest in cooking. So I started actually I would make dishes for the family that would add to the meal.
Such as?
Quesadillas was my first thing. Mm-hmm. I learned to make quesadillas first and foremost, and scrambled eggs. And then it sort of graduated to learning how to make a cheesecake, and then learning how to make a roast. And then I sort of became a sous chef / cook in the family.
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah.
And this is now you're 11, 12 years old?
11, 12. 11, 12 was quesadilla. Yeah. And then cheesecake came at about 13, 14.
So then a kind of cacophony at the dinner table when there were lots of kids there, including grandparents, your parents, etc. What about school? Were you in public school?
I was in private school. I went to a private school in LA. I went to the Buckley School. The school goes from preschool through 12th grade, so that was the only school I attended. And I was there pretty much all the time.
Even when you were working?
For the first several years of my career, which sounds funny to say, from 2 to 9.
Right. I love it.
I basically just did a lot of commercials. So I would be out of school for a day here or 2 days
Right.
there, and then back in school. And we didn't have a lunch program. We took lunch to school.
Right.
But then when I was working on the show, when Little House on the Prairie started, then I did school almost year round with my teacher, Mrs. Manier, on the set.
Okay, so you had a tutor. Right. Right.
I had a tutor.
Okay.
I had a great tutor who the same teacher took me through from fourth grade all the way through my senior year in high school, 4 years of French, all the maths, all the sciences. She was phenomenal.
How extraordinary.
Yeah, she was something special.
You were very lucky.
Very lucky.
Was this somebody who was assigned to you by what? By the producer, by the studio? How does that work?
She was a licensed studio teacher. So she was prepared to teach everything, and I corresponded with the rest of my class, all of my work at Buckley, and she monitored and helped me with it. I mean, to the point where I even dissected a frog on the set. They sent it to me, and I kept it at home in the fridge.
Wait a minute. They sent you a frog. That's, first of all,
they sent me a frog on ice.
Just that phrase. I was sent a frog when I was, however old, right?
I was in high school, so they sent me a frog on ice on a Friday, and the frog stayed in the fridge until I went to work on Monday. And at one point, I was in the classroom dissecting, and the door opened behind me, and it was Michael Landon, and he came in, and he was standing over my shoulder watching.
Right.
And then one by one, like the whole crew started piling in.
I can imagine why.
Until someone finally said, "Guys, we have to go back to work.
Right.
You have to let her finish."
That's a very funny story. But let me pop back a little bit. All right, so that when you're very young and you're doing commercials, were you accompanied by a parent?
I was accompanied by my mother. My mother was sort of at the helm of all of it. My parents divorced when I was 6, and my father passed away when I was 11.
Right.
So my mother was
the through line, of your life.
Yes, and so she was with me almost all the time until Little House started, and then someone else went with me in the second season, but she was there for the very beginning and just making sure everything was okay.
Right. So when you were on a commercial shoot, would she bring food with her, or was there food on the set?
There was food on the set. Oftentimes, the commercials I did were for food or had something, some sort of food element. One of the ones that I remember really clearly was a Tide commercial, and we shot it at the LA Zoo. And they'd asked me what my favorite ice cream was, and at that time it was raspberry sherbet. Mm-hmm. And they wanted me to eat raspberry sherbet on a cone and spill. And then Tide would come to the rescue and save my white dress.
Yeah.
Well, by the end of the day, they kept giving me the spit bucket, but I was, 7, 8. Right. Why would I spit out the ice cream?
Exactly.
What, are they crazy?
Yes, right.
Well, 8 hours later, I still can't eat raspberry sherbet to this day. It's over. It ruined it for me.
Right. Totally understandable. But did Mom ever bring stuff with you? Did she bring food with her?
She brought snacks to auditions. Like after school, she would pick me up, and there would be, oddly enough, as health conscious as my mother was,
right,
there'd be a bologna sandwich on wheat bread with mayonnaise.
Bologna, ubiquitous in the 70s, 60s and 70s. I remember very, very vividly, one of my favorite treats was fried bologna and putting the bologna in the pan and watching it kind of, the middle of it kind of blow up so that it looked like a hot air balloon.
Yep.
If you didn't slice it.
Yeah, and sometimes, too, the sides would curl up, and we called those sombreros. The sides would curl, and the middle would poof up, and it looked like a little sombrero. Very exciting.
That's a new one for me. I got to add that to my list.
Please do.
Do you remember any other snacks when you came home?
Raisins. Raisins were big in our house. Carob chips. My mother didn't want us eating chocolate.
Very L.A.
Yeah, very LA. And Horlicks malted milk tablets.
Malted milk tablets?
Horlick, they were supposed to have some sort of vitamin-like property. This is 60s, 70s.
Right.
But they were also malted milk. And they really were just candy. But that was the treat.
Sort of the alternate of a milk dud. You remember milk duds?
Yes, sort of. Milk duds are caramely.
Right.
This was like a like a Whopper.
Oh,
Not the
okay.
burger, but like it was just malted milk, but no chocolate.
Oh, okay.
Or just malt flavored, but no chocolate around.
Interesting. First I've ever heard of this treat, by the way.
I think Horlicks is a British thing, if I'm not mistaken.
And also, it just brought to mind that when the first time I went to Los Angeles was in the mid-'60s. And I couldn't believe that there were so many health food stores.
Yeah.
Which didn't exist back east. I mean, at the time in the 60s, I was living both in, I started off in New Haven, Connecticut, my first acting job, and then I was in New York working, and I don't recall there being that kind of culture of health food that really originated in California, I think, in Los Angeles particularly.
A lot of alfalfa sprouts in Los Angeles.
Exactly. Okay. Was there much of a change? I guess you've kind of gone over this, but there seemed to have been a sea change in terms of the culinary experience at home between your dad and when your dad passed away and your mom remarried, and those two households.
Yes, our household with my dad was we were on the road a lot. So we were in Vegas and Tahoe and Reno and Palm Springs, and so there was a lot of hotel food and backstage food.
Right.
I think I tasted caviar for the first time maybe when I was 6.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
And liked it, actually.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Describe some of those meals. What was that like on the road?
Somebody somewhere backstage, I want to say it was somewhere in Vegas, or we were out to a fancy dinner or something. We went to a lot of restaurants as kids and learned how to behave in restaurants pretty early. Back then, Vegas was this beautiful, glamorous place where you had to dress up, and I had gloves, and I had Mary Janes and tights, and I had the whole perfect sort of little baby Jackie O outfit.
Gloves. That's the one that stands out to me.
White gloves.
Oh, boy.
And that was one of the places where I tasted caviar for the first time. And I just remember thinking, this is really good because it's so salty. Mm-hmm. Salt was one of my favorite things.
Yeah.
People would send things over to the table, too, when my dad was working. And they'd send grown-up drinks for the grown-ups and a lot of Shirley Temples for the kids. Mm-hmm. Some pretty fancy meals like saule meuniere and escargot. I ate escargot really early, too. I don't remember ever being horribly averse to anything other than lima beans. That was the one thing that I couldn't deal with as a kid.
Was it a flavor thing, a texture thing?
Texture, lima beans and okra. They're not my favorite texture still.
I agree with you on okra. Yes, definitely. Now, did you have any peculiarities in terms of, for instance, when I was a kid, I couldn't have anything mixed with anything else on my plate.
Oh, no, food can't touch. It's not allowed to touch. No, I was very much in your camp. My food had to be separated.
This is kind of universal then. Yeah. Because I had a conversation with a wonderful director, Mike Flanagan, and Mike talked about the same thing, that nothing could touch on the plate or otherwise the meal was completely spoiled.
There was one exception for me, and that was peas and mashed potatoes. Peas and mashed potatoes could mix.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, perfect sense.
Of course it does.
Yeah.
Of course. Everybody knows this.
Right. Were the kitchens different in the two households between the first, before your dad passed away and your mom remarried, and then after?
Not entirely, because they were my mom's kitchens regardless.
Oh, okay. So she set them up, essentially.
Yeah, they were pretty much similar. They were very, very similar. Mm-hmm. There was a little more, I think a little more fun stuff when my dad was around. My dad was a big proponent of late night salami sandwiches on sourdough with hot mustard and a root beer float. Ooh. Which is an interesting way to put a child to bed. Yeah. But so much fun.
It's interesting because when I was researching you a bit and I looked up your dad, I remembered your dad very specifically for a number of movies that I saw him in, a number of television shows when I was growing up. I remember him very vividly. You start working, you're doing commercials, and then you got the part on Little House on the Prairie. And this is relatively early in television history. What was the catering like on the set for Little House?
It was hearty because we worked very hard. We were outside a lot. And so there was always there was a beef selection, there was a chicken selection, there was a seafood selection.
Every day?
Every day. Some days it would depend on, the meat would change. It would be a Salisbury steak or something, but on Fridays was steak and lobster.
Did you have favorites?
Given the opportunity,
Yeah.
I would go meatloaf if they had meatloaf. Whatever was like the simplest, plainest, most IHOP-like food, because I had this, super sophisticated palate that just craved something simple.
Right. And when you got home from the set, were you being given the French, the Swedish, were they still in play then?
They were still in play then. The appetizer was gravlax, and then the meal would be some sort of fantastic lamb stew or a tagine, or, it was always something really interesting. Mm-hmm. In all fairness, though, I will say this. There were traditional roast chicken dinners and roast beef dinners. Mm-hmm. They were fewer and farther between.
This is extraordinary, this conversation, because I've never talked to a guest who had that kind of a cavalcade of different cuisines from a very early age. This is really quite extraordinary. One of the questions that also comes to mind is, so Little House on the Prairie is a period piece. Mm-hmm. Takes place during what period in our history?
The late 1800s.
Was there an effort to recreate the cuisine of the time when you guys had food scenes on the set?
Sometimes. When we filmed the pilot, definitely. I remember really clearly having to do a scene where we were eating pancakes by a fire in the pilot episode, and instead of syrup, they used molasses.
Right.
And I was meant to take a giant fingerful of molasses and eat it and just love it. Molasses on its own is not...
No.
It's not okay.
Not yummy.
Not yummy for an adult, and certainly not great for a 9-year-old.
No.
So it was very difficult for me not to make some sort of face. I really had to focus hard on pretending to enjoy the molasses.
Right.
But the other food that we had, we ate a lot of stews on camera, and those were basically just cans of Dinty Moore stew.
Oh.
Which even for me, who craved simple comfort food, was not okay.
No.
It's just never good.
Right. So it was expedient rather than prepared. Yeah.
Exactly. And then sometimes we would have fried chicken, and that was usually just buckets of Kentucky Fried Chicken, which worked for me perfectly well. It was because we didn't get that at home at all. So for me, that was really fun. Mm-hmm. Our family on the show was the poor family, so we really didn't have fancy dinners. There was the rich family. The Olsen family had roast beef, and that was all made. If we were inside, that was generally made at the kitchen at the studio at the commissary. First at Paramount, then at what is now Sony, used to be MGM. Were
there a lot of scenes around the table that you guys had to shoot?
Yes, we had a lot of dinner scenes, very intense conversations, very lighthearted conversations, introducing to the boyfriends or the future husbands, or there was a lot of conversations around dinner on that show, and breakfast.
And for our listeners and viewers, one of the things that Melissa and I both have endured over the years is shooting dinner scenes around a table in which the coverage, that is, the angles that have to be shot, are multiple. They are endless, these scenes. And you are expected to keep a certain continuity in terms of how you eat and what you eat during the scene, because otherwise it doesn't match when they put the whole thing together, right? Mm-hmm. So did you have any strategies when you were sitting at a dinner scene that you developed over time?
Well, as a child, in the beginning, it was just eat
shovel the food.
Everything that's in front of me. Right. Just shovel it in. It's so exciting.
Right.
It took me a couple of scenes like that to learn how to pace myself.
Yeah.
Matching for me sort of came naturally. I had to learn, I wore braids, pigtails on the show. And if I turned my head, they would switch directions.
Right.
And I learned how to place them by turning my head. Both front, both back, turn your head, one right, one front, left, one front.
Right.
And so that just became second nature. And then consequently, when I took a bite, how I took a bite, what I was biting, the timing of it.
Right.
Also became second nature as a kid.
Yeah.
But those first couple of meals where I gorged myself and then, 3 hours later we're still
right, having to
eating.
Keep shoveling the food in because it needed to match.
I then learned.
Right.
Yes. Now, there were scenes where specifically it was written that I shoveled food in my mouth, so I had to. But Michael Landon generally was always there for that, would make sure that my coverage was either first or last.
Oh.
So that I could just get it over with or be off camera so that I didn't have to do it as much. And then they'd get one shot of me just madly shoveling food in my plate. He also had a tendency to throw food at us from off camera.
Oh, really?
Before cutting.
Right.
Yeah, so he'd let us keep eating, and then we'd just get a spoonful of peas in the side of our head, or he'd say something horrible or make piggy noises or something.
Over a long period of time, you build relationships, obviously, with people. If you're on a show and Little House shot for, you were what, 10 seasons?
9 seasons, but 10 years.
Oh, right, because there was the pilot, then the next year, the beginning of the actual show. Exactly. Something that I talk about often when I do panels at conventions is the kind of camaraderie that occurs, particularly if you're working with a group of people over a long period of time. I've had more of that experience in the theater of being in a show over a period of a year or two, every night, not necessarily, shooting. But at any rate, to be doing this for 9 years, there is created a family.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We're still in touch. Pretty much all of us. And we gather together when we can. Mm-hmm. We gather together for weddings, for funerals, for tributes, for all sorts of things. And we stay in touch as much as we can. It's hard to let go of that, especially for so many of us on the show who were children.
Yeah.
That is our second family.
Yeah, right.
I mean, we grew up with the Grips and electricians, and all of their kids were the background players on the show. So we grew up with them too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were all the background players on our show were children of people on the crew.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's very interesting. I didn't know that existed.
Yeah, and much of that crew had been together since Bonanza. So they were a family. And then we came in and were just enveloped as a part of the family too.
Oh, how great.
And later when I established my own company, when I was 14.
Yes.
When we did our own movies, when we did the Miracle
Wait a minute.
Worker,
You created Half Pint Productions when you were 14?
Let's be clear. I was along for the ride as my mother, and then my manager we had hired created it, and then came to me and said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Playing Helen Keller would be really fun." Mm-hmm. Little did I know what I was getting myself into, and it did turn out to be an incredible experience. Yeah. But what we did was we used the Little House on the Prairie crew. So we kept that family when we were on hiatus to work on our films too. Oh. So we were always together. Well,
that's an extraordinary experience to have in one's life, I must say.
It definitely spoils one.
Yeah.
Moving forward and then working with people who are actually difficult and don't get along. It's so foreign. It was so foreign to me when I saw it the first time. Right. I thought, what? Is this how it is?
It's the real world, being out in the real world and out of that bubble that you were in for a long time. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
So now you're growing up. You are now not a young person on a set in a series anymore. You're out working, and you are creating a family of your own. Was there a sense that you wanted to continue what you had as a kid in terms of your experiences in the kitchen with your own children?
Absolutely. Meals were a big deal with my kids growing up and also with my friend group, who we all had kids around the same age, my best friend and our, just the whole group. We, regular meals were an event. The kids came, whatever was going on, homework would stop.
Right.
It was an important time for our family. It was a time to connect and talk.
Yeah.
And then on weekends, we'd get together with my friends and their kids, and everybody would go from one house one weekend to another house the other weekend, and we would plan these huge elaborate meals. Mm-hmm. My best friend is a cordon bleu chef. She's remarkable. Mm-hmm. We would get together on weekends and we would choose a theme or a style, whether it was Italian or Japanese or Spanish or whatever it was, and everyone would get together. There'd be like 10 adults, and we'd each take a dish or something, and we'd all get together all day while the kids were playing and hanging out, and then we would all sit at these big long tables and eat. And really, for us, it became consciously celebrating and being grateful for the abundance in our lives. We called them abundance dinners. and a way to share them with one another and really acknowledge the fact that we have access to wonderful food, that we have each other in our lives, and that we can share this.
Just how fortunate we are, how blessed. We talk about our blessings all the time.
Oof. Yeah, and that's a big one.
And were the children involved in any of the preparation?
On occasion, I have 4 boys. Not the most interested in cooking. The youngest one did want to learn. I got a lot of, Mom, please, do I have to? I wanted to go play blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
You know what? For me, just getting them to eat interesting foods that weren't just hot dogs and chicken nuggets was more important to me than having them with me in the kitchen. Now they ask me to help. Now that they're young adults, they're like, Mom, I have my girlfriend I want to cook for. What should I make? They're learning. Yes. My youngest one is a mad egg scrambler. He's a really good egg scrambler.
And there is an art to it, by the way.
There is an art to it.
It's not just, whip up the... Yeah, exactly.
His signature dish is a pesto-crusted salmon.
Ooh.
That I taught him to make. It's a good one, and it's very impressive.
Ooh, I'm thinking about salmon tonight. I mean, it's interesting because I'm thinking of parallels in our lives, and the main parallel is that we both grew up in a family business. You grew up in show business. I grew up in the food business. My father owned a restaurant in the small town that I lived in. He was a Greek immigrant who came here in the 1920s and opened a restaurant, and I worked in the restaurant from the time I was 10 years old. That's why I do this podcast, by the way. And my entire life has been about food in a lot of ways because my mother was very, very interestingly, an uneducated woman, a very sort of basic human being in a lot of ways, but who kept saying to me, all right, come here. Watch me do this because you're not going to have a woman taking care of you all your life. Taught me to iron, taught me to cook, taught me to sew buttons on my shirts. And I think there's something about having that kind of lineage that you grow up with that's holy.
Yeah. It's sacred.
It's very sacred. And listening to you talk about the fact that for instance, that your dad came from a vaudevillian family and that your mom was in the business, your dad was in the business, that I don't know if your kids have followed up. Have they?
3, actually. 3.
Performing, producing?
The 2 oldest ones are actors, but earn a living as one is a boom operator, the other one is a background actor primarily, but they make their own horror films on the regular and have since they were teenagers.
Oh, how cool.
Yes. The next oldest one wants nothing to do with the business whatsoever, even though he's made cameo appearances in a couple of my films and is actually a really good actor. He just isn't interested in it at all. And the youngest one is here in New York City, bartending and auditioning.
Right. The struggles of a young up-and-coming actor. It's
exactly.
Interesting because none of my children have shown any interest whatsoever in acting. In fact, I think they had an early understanding of just what the vagaries are and how difficult it is, and have ended up being very smart about staying as far away from show business as possible.
That's the 35-year-old Dakota, my son Dakota.
Yeah.
He watched his dad and I, the times we've struggled and when it's been really difficult and just gone, not for me.
Right.
Nope.
You have a company now called Modern Prairie. Tell us a little bit about that, because this is a subject that is, I think, germane as we grow older, obviously. And everybody out there, folks, I don't care how old you are or how young you are, you're going to get older. and we also have an older population in this country. So tell us a little bit about Modern Prairie and how that happened and what engendered it.
Modern Prairie sort of grew out of a conversation I had with my business partner, Nicole Hazy, about, it had started as an idea that I had that there might be some sort of retail space for something that was connected to the prairie and that sort of homey feeling that we all get. There are objects that and of course scents and things that hit us in a sensory way that bring us great comfort.
Yes.
And they seem to be attached to those sort of traditions. And it sort of, for me, started with the idea of what a butter crock is, or a butter bell, for lack of a better word. And it's been around forever and ever. And it's the little device, ceramic device, where the cup that holds the butter goes in the holder with a little bit of water, and you can keep it on your counter at room temperature, and it keeps your butter soft and fresh for a week.
Right.
But it's one of those sort of like homey, cozy things. And we started talking about these sorts of items, and it sort of grew from there into, well, this is not just retail. This is providing a space where women can connect on so many other levels. So we've gone from just, we've never actually been just a retail space. Also, all of the things we sell are made by women and who have women-owned companies. Yeah, so we're really promoting and allowing for people to see all of these gorgeous products, and they all have a story. Everything, it's not just there randomly.
Right.
There's a reason for the things we curate. And then we offer workshops in everything from how to deal with grief during the holidays to how to deal with your finances and become independent at this time in your life, how to deal with children moving back home, how to deal with taking care of elderly parents, and how to make a perfect pie crust, or how to pick out the right charcuterie, or we did a cheese making workshop. We made mozzarella cheese. We made paneer as well. And so we're sort of all over the place, but we're in a space now where we've created this community for, we say the maturing woman, I say the continually evolving woman. And there really is not a lot there. And one of the main things that this provides is a space where women know they're not alone going through anything. Someone's either been through it or is going to go through it, and we all share our experiences together.
Yes.
It just gives the members of our community such a sense of validation that, they're not the only ones.
Well, how extraordinary. Now, how does one access Modern Prairie? That is it primarily an online platform? Yeah,
we're an online platform. We can be found at www.modernprairie.com. And then we just launched an app, which there's a link to on the website. The Modern Prairie app is available on all platforms as well, Android, iPhone. And the thing that we love so much about our app is that it's not a social media space. So there's no trolls. Nobody can just randomly come in and say horrible things. You have to be a member of our community to join, and you choose who you want to communicate with if you want to get to know somebody.
Great idea.
As opposed to just being wide open. Yes, because the internet, by and large, and social media is not a safe place for anyone, but it can be particularly brutal for older women, honestly. It's really hard. And, I just wanted to create a place where women can come and not just be pigeonholed as either that horrible old crone or that doddering old lady that we just shove into the corner because she's bananas. There's so much more to us than that.
And that particular way of thinking of anybody that is pigeonholing people by what we see rather than what we experience is so damaging in so many ways.
It's incredibly damaging. It's also very short-sighted because we're the consumers. We're the ultimate spenders now.
Yep.
We're the ones who actually have some disposable income and have children and grandchildren we want to buy for.
Yep.
And we want to buy for ourselves too.
Yep.
And it's just so silly to, it's so myopic, the way the retail world works and the way the world works in general, that we're just dismissed. And we are a powerhouse.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I have one final question that I ask everyone.
Yes.
If there's one culinary memory that you have from your life, not necessarily just your childhood, but childhood is always great too. And that is something that when you smell something in the world as you're living now, or you taste something, it takes you back to that moment when you had that experience when you were a kid or when you were a teenager. What would that be?
Caramelizing onions in butter. Just the smell of onions and butter. It takes me right back to matzah with schmaltz. And every other dish that has started with onions, which is kind of my entire life, including noodle kugels, which is my ultimate comfort food, a savory one. It just, the smell of onions frying, specifically in butter, is evocative of the beginning of something that's always really good.
It's the start of a cascade of flavor, often.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And it smells like my childhood home.
Well, with that, Melissa Gilbert, I want to thank you so much for being a guest with me on Cooking by Heart. This experience has been very educational for me in so many ways. I learned so much today just from your talking about your past and your childhood and your food. And by the way, keep in mind, I'm going to be after you for a recipe. All right?
You will get one.
I post recipes from all the guests on the website, and then one day we're going to put them all together into a book.
Oh, I love it.
All
okay. You will definitely get one from me, and it will be homey.
Thank you, Melissa Gilbert, for being on Cooking by Heart.
Thank you. This was lovely.